Great, so welcome to the third training for the SOBEC for curators and collection managers. This one is focusing on quality control and serial hierarchy within the system. So our first training was just an introduction to SOBEC's capabilities. It's online already at this link. It's a little bit rough at the beginning, but it will be replaced. We've asked someone here to trim out the first couple minutes while we're getting ready, but that's up and ready right there at the YouTube. Submitting and editing resources, files, and metadata. That we've completed all of those trainings. We will be recording that and putting that online. I think that will be available by Monday. That'll be on at the same YouTube site. Then this training we're looking at is the QC Online and serial hierarchy. This is the last training of this, the last instance of this. And then the curator tools, we'll be doing webinars for the curator tools on next Tuesday and Thursday. So that's really curator tools and outreach, just in general on how to promote your collection as well as how to work within your collection and facilitate changes that you want to make to it. So our agenda today, hopefully this isn't too repetitious for some people, but we are looking at structural metadata theory. We'll just quickly push through sort of the theory behind what we're talking about, and then we'll show you how, again, very briefly, how structural metadata works within SOBEC CM packages. We're not going to look at metadata in depth. We're just quickly going to discuss sort of where it sits. And then we'll demo the quality control tool. And this is, as I say, this is a new tool we just added in the last, really been perfecting it, I guess, over the last 6 months. And then the last thing we'll talk about is serial hierarchy. Okay, so structural metadata theory. Essentially, what is structural metadata? Because that's a big part of what the quality control tool does, is help you create structural metadata for your items online in SOBEC. So structural metadata is essentially the table of contents. What you're looking at here is a table of contents from a document. And we see the page numbers, we see the names of each chapter. So this table of contents facilitates the user to both know what's in your content, as well as to seek to a certain amount of data, a small subset or division of the pages to find exactly what they're looking for. So this is what a table of contents looks like online. This is a slightly older version, but this is a nice deep example where we have 3 levels of divisions. So our first example, we're really just seeing 1 level of divisions here. And the second one, we're seeing deeper, where you have elephants in nature, then you have subdivisions here, and you have even final subdivisions here below it. So you can see the hierarchical nature that you can have with chapters and divisions. And that, of course, reflects reality and reflects probably how the book was originally published. So the hierarchy within an item, I would just say, mostly what we're talking about structural metadata here, we're talking about digital resources that have page images associated with them. So we're not really talking about digital resources that have a PDF, because PDFs sort of have their own structural metadata in there. They already have the pages in order. So we're really talking about the more common case where you've taken a resource of some kind and you've scanned the pages or somehow digitized them into images, and then you are putting these images directly online. So that hierarchy, that item would be, you have divisions or chapters, as we're calling them as well. Underneath those divisions, you have pages, and underneath of those pages, then you have the actual physical files or the images that's on your physical media. So this hierarchy sort of goes through both from the physical item, because the items are divided usually into chapters and pages, and then by the time you get to the bottom, to the files, that's really the digital manifestation of that object. So we're going to quickly go through this hierarchy and talk about each of these 3 phases or levels. So division is the highest level. Basically, there's 2 elements to a division. It has types and it has labels. So the type just describes what kind of division it is. So when you're talking about books, a lot of times you really only think immediately about chapters, but we also have other ways we can divide the images into pages. We can say that's a front cover, that's front matter, table of context, back index, back advertisements, etc. So that would be sort of the type of that chapter, or division, I should say. The label is just a way to name that chapter. So if you have something that you need to give it a very descriptive name that is really doesn't describe that type of a division, it actually says this is the name of that division, that's what we have the label for. So divisions can contain child divisions or pages. They don't contain files directly. So pages, a page is really just a specialized division, and when we think about it from the digital side. So the page, again, has two elements, type and label, but in this case, type is always page. So essentially, page is a specialized division of type page. So again, it has a label, so you can name your page with page 2, plate 4, image 5, whatever you want to call that thing. So pages don't contain pages, pages contain files. So we talk about our hierarchy of divisions, pages, and files. So in SOAP-XCM, in particular, files are always contained by a division of type page for page images. So then the last level is the files itself. So the file maps to a single file in a networked system, whether that's the same system that it's sitting in the same folder, or whether that's a URL elsewhere. It ultimately points to a file that has a file name, has an identifier, which is unique inside this metadata, and it can have a checksum if you like, so to verify that you really have the right file. So files are linked to pages in such a way that files that have a similar root sit in the same page. So here's an example. These 5 images or 5 files all have the same root. So if you load these into a SOAP system, it would recognize these are the similar root, and it would put them all, it would say these are 5 files that belong to one page. So you can see what we mean by root is really just the first part of the file name, but we have a special compensation here for the thumbnail. So thm.jpg is considered its own ending. So this is not really a discussion on digitization, but since we're talking about files, I really thought it would be a good time to mention numbering of files. So because we're talking about files with similar roots. When you number your files, if you're digitizing or scanning an object, you should number them sequentially, as we see here, but you should also lead them with zeros so that they're a fixed width, a fixed length of file name. And really the only reason to do this is so that it correctly sorts into Windows and correctly sorts into our system when it's loaded into the system. So sometimes people name them this way, where you say image space 1, 2, and then image 11. So the problem with that, of course, is that we'll sort incorrectly. You'll end up with a sort that's more like this, where image 1, then 10, 11, then 2, 3. So as long as you abide by sort of this sort of file naming, it should all order correctly. You don't absolutely have to be 5 long, of course. I mean, that could be an overkill. If you know your objects are all 100 pages or less, then you really only need to make it be a length of 3. But in general, this is the good format to follow. So it doesn't mean you can't include interesting information in front of it. It just needs to be constant, and we suggest you put a dash under it. So here's some pages that were scanned for a book called Tribulations. So we wanted to keep some sort of indication in the file name in this case. So we called it Tribulations _, and then we put in a fixed width or fixed length numeric system. Okay, I'll back off of that. So here's the example we looked at earlier. This is the table of contents for an online object with a nice deep hierarchy of divisions. So here's the divisions that we pulled out of that, or a section of them we pulled out of the table of contents. We're seeing elephants in nature has a subsection of species, has 2 subsections of Africa and Asian. So those are divisions. When you're looking at table of contents, you're almost always looking at division names. So underneath those divisions are where you insert pages. So you start to see our hierarchy slowly getting built. We have divisions containing divisions or pages, and ultimately pages at the bottom of our hierarchy, until we add files, which of course get inserted underneath the pages as well. So now we're starting to look at the full hierarchy, where you have divisions with pages and files. And this is very much the hierarchy of digital objects in general, and as well as digital objects in Digital Library of the Caribbean and all of our SOAP libraries. So briefly want to then talk about how the structural metadata that we've just been discussing, how it fits into SOAP, how it fits into the Digital Library of the Caribbean or any of the other libraries that we're using. So we looked at this in the last session. I just wanted to quickly bring it back up. So our object sitting in Digital Library of the Caribbean or any of our systems, it's basically a METS wrapper. So your object is sitting in this wrapper, which is called a METS wrapper. That's the standard METS. Inside of it, we have mods. We have all of these nice little bibliographic descriptive data about the object itself. And these are different extension schemas you might be able to add into it. So METS was the Metadata Encoding and Transmission Standard from Library of Congress. As we discussed, this was the wrapper that accepts any XML schemas inside of it. And it has these 5 major portions. One was the METS header, which is information about the METS file itself. One was the DMD sec, which is bibliographic or descriptive metadata about that object. There's an administrative section, which has into the AMD sec. And finally, there's the last 2, which are the ones we're really going to be looking at more and impacting more in the work we talk about today. And that is the list of all files that are grouped by type. That's in the file section. So it's essentially just the list. Every file that's a part of your digital object is in the file sec. It's a list of every single file almost. And then the struct map, which is where you start to see the divisions and pages. So that's where the structural metadata is pulled out. And it's where the files are linked to even say they're under the same page. So file sec is just your list of files, not organized in any representative way for the object. It's only in the structure map that it's all pulled together to give you order, give you pages, and give you divisions. So here's a structural metadata example. Let's pull this up. Hopefully it's pulling up. What, 1660? Okay, so we show the table of contents here. So these are the lists of our divisions. So when we talk about the labeling of divisions and the typing and giving types and labels to divisions, this is how it appears to a user. So they see the list of all the different chapters. They can click on one. It'll bring them to the beginning of that section. So this is all from the divisions. And then when we give pages labels, that's what affects this. So this drop down that allows people to just jump directly to one page, for example. This is all from the names of the pages. So that's sort of how you can see that it interacts with the user, how they get to sort of see all the work you're doing and how it interacts on their object. So here's another example, which we'll just quickly show through the slides. So this is an example with very simple table of contents. You can see there's only 3 divisions up here. I think there's only about 10 pages in this object. But it's a good one to show you because it's not too gigantic then. So this is, and we're just going to briefly show this. Don't expect you guys to really completely digest this XML metadata on the fly, but this is a struct map section, or a file section. And you can see it just lists the images for 3 pages. So we have all the text files here. I said it was a list of files grouped by type. So that's why you see all the text files at the top, and then you have some TIFF files here, and you have some JPEGs below it. But essentially, that's the key part of this, is just the name of each file. And that's what we see in the file sec within the METS object. And then the second section that's impacted is the struct map. So this is, again, where we sort of pull the files together, and we say this is a division, these are pages, etc. So you see the actual divisions here. So we have the label of the book, we have the front cover division, we have a page named page 1, we have a chapter named Grandmother Puss with a Grateful Mouse right here with pages underneath it, and under the pages are these little file IDs. So this is how it maps. You have the struct map and the file section. The file section lists the pages, and the struct map refers to them. So looking at this one section, under page 1, we have this file 001 text, we have F1, which is 001.tiff, and we reference T1, which is the 001.jpg. So that's, or the TIFF. So this is sort of how they refer to each other. File sec is your list of files, struct map creates your divisions. Okay, so then the quality control tool is the tool that we use within Sobek Online to work with these things, to make the divisions and name the pages. It allows users, like we're saying, to create visually the structural metadata, to create and name their divisions and chapters, to name the pages, to swap the order that pages appear. You can use it to upload new page images and to delete page images that shouldn't be there. So it's an online tool that we've just transitioned to, but we've been using another version of this tool that we created in-house for really the last 8 or 9 years. And so that version is at one point sat within the DLock Toolkit, which was a Windows application you had to install, and the DLC Toolbox, which is still utilized by our digital library some, and that again is a Windows application you have to install. So this major release is really just moving it to the web so that it's available for everybody. And so it's currently in beta release. I think we've fixed most of the problems we found. We're letting people report these different problems. That will be released in our code base with version 4.0, which will be released in about a week actually. So other people who are looking to utilize this remotely will be able to, on their own digital libraries hosted internally, will have access to this as well. So just a note, obviously you have to be logged on and have rights over that item before you can do quality control. So this isn't a public interface that's handed out for everybody. It's just for people who have rights on the item. So here's an image of an item, and you can see this quality control button up at the top. That's how we access it. If you're logged on and you have proper access, you'll see that. And this is just a quick screenshot of what it looks like. So let me pull it up on a site for us. We have some, I'll just use this one. So you can sign on with any sort of authentication. We'll say quality control. Cool. So now you can see what we're looking at. We're looking at each of the pages. So each one of these, the image is related to a single page within this document. So we'll quickly start stepping through all the different features here. If you look at the single thumbnail, it says page and D, which if you hover over it, it says division. You can actually change the size of your thumbnails. Ooh. Hey, where'd it go? Okay, let's try this again. So you can change the size of your thumbnails by clicking medium thumbnails, or you can go to larger thumbnails. So now you can at least see that it says pagination and division. And you have this little checkbox. So this is the entire part where you're numbering your pages and your divisions. So the name of this page itself is front cover 1. You could name it something different if you wanted. You could name it cover front, whatever you like. That would just be the name of that one page. So the check mark says it's a new division. So both of these are part of the front cover chapter or division. This has a check mark, so it's saying this is the beginning of a new division. So if you uncheck that, it would remove that division, and you can see that the front cover then moves forward. So now all 3 of these pages are part of this front cover division. We'll select it again. We can select these different options. These are controllable. You can have multiple lists of different drop-downs. You can assign them to students or users to say, this person or myself currently, I'd like to use this list, and change that to another list for other work you're doing, which is really useful if you're doing like 1,000 digital resources that only have like copyright statement, letter, the main content, and maybe like a closing cover or something. So if you are always dealing with the same divisions, you can modify these. These are the ones we have on default right now. So we'll select title page. So this is now, this page here, which is named page 1, is a part of the division of type title page. We could also make it chapter if we liked. So this is the beginning of a chapter. We could type anything we liked, like my favorite chapter. And so now that is the name for this chapter. Once again, if we unclick the next division, this chapter will move forward, and both these pages will now belong to this chapter labeled my favorite chapter. So this is sort of the bulk of the stuff of the actually adding of the page numbering and the chapters. Everything is right there at the bottom of these screens. I'm going to switch back to the small thumbnail for the rest of the demo here. Okay. So you can see it just goes through. So now I'm going to step through. Oh yeah, right down here there's information button. This is something we're still working on finishing implementing. And the idea is if you have archived the content, the TIFF, if you let the system know that you've archived the TIFF and loaded the information about the original TIFFs, you'll be able to click that and view it. If you have like view details about it, like the DPI, for example, or the bit space that it was originally scanned in. Otherwise, if it's just a JPEG, it'll probably just show you some technical details on the JPEG. So it's really most useful when combined with the archiving features of the system. The magnifying glass here just opens another screen. So this is that one page being opened again. And the trash can allows you to delete a page. So we'll maybe load a page in a second, and then we can delete it as well. So let's go through this main menu system up here at the top. So you can save your work at any time. It'll just save. Completing actually saves it and then closes it and brings you back to the book so you can see how you impacted it. And then cancel, of course, just cancels all your changes. So if we hit complete, oh, I guess it was working on it. And then it says my favorite chapter. So you can see that we've impacted it now by changing the name of that division. So edit, these are larger things which we over time found we needed. If you want to clear all the pagination in a book, you can click this. If you want to clear all the pagination and reorder it based on file name, then that option does that. So this little number you're seeing up here is actually the number of that file. So we talked about how you should number the files. It's exactly sort of the numbering scheme I showed you. So in this case, we started with 0, which is absolutely fine. Usually this happens when they realize they didn't scan a portion. So probably the original student scanned page 0, scan this page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We renumber it 00A so that it automatically gets inserted between these two pages. So the numbering of the files is what, again, guides the order of the pages by default. And going to reorder pages, we'll just force it to reorder it based on that. So you can also change your thumbnail view size here. You can change how many thumbnails you show per page. This is only relevant, of course, for very large objects. So if we look at an object that's 1,001 pages in it, we'd actually have to page between the two different sections of thumbnails. Or you could say, if your bandwidth is quite low, you can set it to only be 25. So automatic numbering is, if we come in here and we say, we'll label this page 1, and hit tab, you'll see it actually numbers all the rest of them. So it kind of makes sense to use a value like page 1. You see a number there again, but you could really use anything. So if you wanted this to be illustration 1 or illustration 1, you can see it auto numbers throughout it. In fact, I think if you hit 1 and hit tab, it'll auto do page for you. So if you're doing a set of maps, we often think about book type materials. But if you're just doing a bunch of maps, you might also say something like sheet 1, and that would number through. So that's the automatic numbering. By default, it's set on. You can turn it off completely, and you can set it to only be in the same division. So if we do the same division, and I number this front cover 1, you can see it stops once it gets to this division. So it only numbered those 2 pages. So that's a really useful setting. And then there's the drag and drop pages. So if we enable the drag and drop pages, you'll be able to grab a page and just drag it and drop it between the 2 other pages. So that's really useful when you realize 2 pages are just near each other but are slightly out of order. Drag and drop with confirmation just pops up a thing that says, are you sure you want to do this, essentially. So you can also view some of the stuff, like view the directory of files, view the METS file that you've been creating. So this is really more technical stuff and really don't need to be looking at it that much, I guess. This help will go to our help pages, which will be released in the next week or so as well with the new version. So that's pretty much all the menus, and we've talked about everything on this. So the only part we haven't talked about is if you have a large object, I guess you can jump to a certain thumbnail. But this allows you to upload a new page image. So let's hit plus. I'm sure we want to add more pages, yes. So we can navigate to a page. Okay, we have a page right here. Upload it. Must be really big if it's taking this long. I think it was too big. While this is uploading, I will say that we are modifying this upload system, so we'll be seeing this change in the very near future to allow multi-page uploads. That's something I've been working on, hoping to actually get it out by Monday. All right, so we've uploaded this new TIFF. It automatically created JPEGs for us, so we'll hit submit. And that will bring us back into the quality control tool because they're images, and we can see it here sitting at the very, very end. So that's an easy way to insert a page. And if you numbered it, as 0014A, it would pop in right between these two. But of course, if there's any problem with that and it doesn't work, you can always drag the item and just drop it in between them. Oops, didn't quite get far enough on me. But yeah, so you can drop it and drag it between things. And this is just to save it. Okay, so it just saves it and doesn't take you back to the object. These again are your thumbnail. These last ones are really like a cursor control. So you see this little guy hanging out here on top of the very first page. That says that's your main thumbnail. So if you do searches or browses, that's the thumbnail that users will see related to this object. You can modify that by clicking on that and say for some reason we want this to be the main thumbnail. That will now become the main thumbnail once we save it. The option with the little hand is useful for moving multiple pages. So let's say we want to click here and we want to move this one and this one, perhaps before the Treaster page. So these little arrows appear here. They're kind of easy to miss. We'll probably need to make them bigger. But if you click on the arrow, it'll say move the selected pages before this page. So we'll select it. It will show you you're inserting multiple pages between this page and that page. We'll hit submit. And yep, it took those pages and moved them in front. So that's an easy way to move multiple pages. And you could move more creatively. You could collect all of these and tell it to move before this one. So canceling it is quite easy. You just select it again. You can hit cancel. Delete is for deleting multiple pages. So I mentioned you can delete a single page here. You can additionally select this, select your page, and then select delete. And that would have worked for multiple pages. So you could highlight many pages and delete them all. So this is really all the main features in the quality control app. We just quickly demoed through these. So, you can also add comments. So any work you do here is actually recorded in the internal tracking system. So if you're doing work and you really want to explain why you're doing work, say this work was performed during a demonstration, we'll say. We'll hit complete. If you go into the built-in tracking system, go to history. You can see here it says we updated the pages and divisions, and it also gave the comment of this work was performed during a demonstration. So that's what the comments is for, just a way if you want to log something into the history that you can stick it in there while you're doing the work. So that is very briefly and very quickly the quality control tool online for dealing with structural metadata. Yeah. So
it's really exciting, especially for someone like me who works primarily with scholars, with digital scholarship projects, digital humanities projects, and data curation. And the serial hierarchy gives us the ability to, especially when coupled with the aggregation, so all the different collections and sub-collection levels, and then the context pages, the child pages, that help situate those collections. The serial hierarchy allows us to aggregate together one intellectual entity like a data set, and then to have the iterations over time as we would with versioning, in the same way with software, and the same way you'll have a small corpus, which is normal with digital research projects, with other curated scholarly works, and it allows them to be collected together. And this is one of the reasons that Research Computing at UF is really excited about working with us. And we're working together to bundle SOBIC-CM as the front end to the research computing back end with the super high performance computer, which is known as Hypergator. It's such a powerful computer, it has a name. And so the serial hierarchy, it seems really simple on some levels, and some levels it can seem a little complex. It's actually a really great balance of elegance in terms of elegant design, because it takes together all of this complexity and then allows the flexibility for different approaches.
Yeah, exactly. So we start with like the very sort of mundane, and then we'll start moving toward the more interesting. So here's an object and a newspaper type object in DLOC, and we see it's been published. We have certain years that it was published and dates. So if we go to the all volumes and look at the tree view, we see this sort of drill down where you can look at each date and drill down and say, what do we have in 1927, June? These are the dates. So this is sort of the original idea of serial hierarchies that we came up with was, well, we have these newspapers, and how do we represent the fact that we have all these different issues that are related to the same title? So there's the title, and then each one of these are different issues. So then this is another sort of not crazy example, sort of follows the same basic idea. All right, so and this isn't a newspaper, but it's something quite similar. So we can look and we see here we have actually 3 versions of this, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So we use the serial hierarchy just a little bit differently here, and we inserted a language at the top. So we have English, then the year, then the month, and the day. And then you select a certain one, and you're looking at that individual issue. So that's another sort of serial hierarchy. It's certainly a little bit different because it's not just by date, but it sort of makes sense. So as we started looking at how we utilize this and sort of the usefulness of it, we started looking at other objects that made a lot of sense to pull together, but weren't maybe generally historically considered serials or newspapers. So a good example of that is the aerial photographs that we have from all over the state of Florida. So we end up with many different flight lines over different years over the same county. And we wanted to pull this together and say all of these flight lines, all this distinct imagery and data, it all belongs together into a single title called Aerial Photographs of Dade County from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So using that serial hierarchy allows us to do that again. So if you're within a single flight over Florida, you can click here and it'll show you. You can click related flights, it will show you every other related flight we have from the same publisher for the same over the same Dade County, so all the different years that we have. So it's another great way of using the serial hierarchy to allow people to discover other resources you have that are related. And then Sanborn maps is another example, so it's slightly different. We're not using aerials anymore. These are maps that we've digitized. And it's not as deep, but you can see here we have different map sets, all of the Miami, Florida area, so we were able to pull them all together. And again, if you're inside a single map, you can click up here and it says related maps. So it's another way to, again, guide users and show them, this isn't just one single point sitting in our site. We have all these other things that are related and help you discover them. So those sort of make a lot of sense as you start moving along. So we started also looking at more archival materials. So we did a project with these Rickley photographs, our African Studies librarian did. So Martin Rickley photographs, they sit in a scrapbook. So we digitized this scrapbook first, and we digitized it as one would a book. So you sort of get this feeling, especially if you switch into our page turner view, you get a feeling that it's a book. It's an open book that you're able to leaf through. But we were looking at all these little photographs inside of it and thinking, well, we don't have an ability to really encode data about these photographs. So we did get the ability to make a user feel like maybe they're holding this scrapbook in their hand and give them an idea what the original physical manifestation was, but we weren't able to give all the great detail we wanted in every photograph. So that's where we started looking at the serial hierarchy and saying, well, why don't we go through and have one instance that looks like it's a scrapbook, and have another one that is the photographs. So we would cut out the photographs, obviously digitally, and create new objects for each one. And that's what these are. So this is maybe the first picture in it, this photograph of a bearded Ethiopian man in a dark cape and hat sits on a donkey. If we click on the description, this gives us a chance to add all this good bibliographic data about the single photograph as opposed to the entire scrapbook. So it's always that question of how do you do with scrapbooks? Like, do you treat them as a one object, or do you treat them as like a bunch of little objects? And by pulling them together in the same serial hierarchy, we like to think that we treated them as both, really. We're able to look at both the full photo album as well as each individual one. That's an interesting example of really how, yeah.
Yeah, and this is a really great example of how using the digital collections can not only leverage, present, and preserve the accurate provenance and all of the rich metadata that's already available, but it can also then leverage that to do things that you can't do in a physical world. Because obviously, you couldn't have a scrapbook both as one contained scrapbook and then zoomed in on individual images so that people can look at them separately. But you can do that in the digital world, and and in doing so, you're actually respecting the artifactual and physical nature of the material. So it's a really exciting way to see how can we do things the right way to respect our physical materials, and then how can we also do things better through the enhanced access that's allowed in digital interfaces. And this is really important with some of the things like research scholars' research materials for a particular project or for a particular study or a particular data set. Because often people think of data sets as like, oh, they're a bunch of numbers and spreadsheets or database type information. But often what you have, you may have statistical information. It may be in a spreadsheet, but it may also be photographs of a particular area, a particular archaeological site where there was a dig. And it may also include it normally includes a code book or a way to interpret the data so that people can understand it. So in addition to the overall metadata on the research study, you have a code book, you have the quantifiable information, spreadsheets, and other things. And then you also have the supplementary data that's necessary to really understand it. That can be photos, that can be artifacts, it can be all sorts of materials. And the example with the scrapbook gives you a way to see how all of these can be bundled together in a way that respects the original and that best supports the research intent.
So yeah, we're often, with the tool of serial hierarchy, we're often left trying to figure out how we want to have it, what we can do with this tool, with each of the things we're looking at. Essentially, it's always the question of like, well, how do I do this individual scrapbook or this individual archival material? Like, what becomes my digital object? And so we have examples where we've done different things. This is an example, obviously, where we drilled down just about as far as you would possibly drill down in the scrapbook. We certainly have other scrapbooks where we haven't drilled down like that. We have a collection that we are digitizing archival material just based on the grant. We don't really have much money yet for metadata, so this is mostly just a pure digitization grant. And going a little bit slow. Hopefully I can pull one of these out. Right, so in this case, each one of these is a folder. So this is the actual entire collection for this is called the Ormond Family Papers. And so we've taken each one of these as an individual folder that we even haven't broken it down. So if you look at our thumbnails, you'll see a very small folder here, but there's a folder with only 2 items, or maybe even a single item in it. So let's see, we'll grab another one. It's like, why, it's always sort of this trying to figure out what equals your digital object. And all of it is really based on like, to what level are you going to describe these things. So this page here could have its own certain metadata, but because it's one page sitting in what is essentially a book or one digital object, you'll be unable to describe and put metadata just for these 2 pages combined. So the question we always look at when we begin digitizing things is like, well, how much effort can we get into metadata? Because the objects need to reflect that. The item hierarchy, the serial hierarchy needs to reflect that. So in the case of the scrapbooks, we ended up making an individual item for a section of a page because we were going to do that. In this case, we don't have the resources to do it, and we just wanted to get it up online. So we've done a single folder as a digital resource, even with scanning of the folder part, which I have to admit at first I thought was kind of strange, but when I saw it online, it just seemed like it kind of worked and really, again, represented the physical manifestation. So in this case, the serial hierarchy, each item in it is a complete folder within this archival collection. So you can see you have a lot of control and a lot of ability to choose what is an item and how they're related to each other. So the way things are being related, we have titles and items. Titles are identified by their bib ID, we call it, which is short for bibliographic identifier. This is alternatively, we've called it item group sometimes. And then we have underneath titles, we can have any number of items. So these are identified by bib ID and then vid or volume identifier. So we call them items. Alternatively, they've been called volumes, and they're essentially the same thing as issues. So if you look at a newspaper like the Tampa Tribune would be your title, and then every individual day that was issued would be your item. So metadata is associated at the item level. That's the bulk of the metadata sits there. So if you want to describe a certain portion of something and give it its own metadata, then it has to be an item, for example. So we said items are identified by bib ID and vid. If you're logged on to DLOC, you'll see there's the bib ID : vid. So this is what it uniquely identifies. This is essentially the digital object identifier, DOI, within the system for this object. So between the titles and the items, we can insert this hierarchy. So the hierarchy is up to 5 levels. It goes 5 levels deep. I think the user interface only supports 3 by default. We haven't really had a need to go much deeper. So each level has its own display text and its own display order, and that's what controls how the items are linked to the title. So the hierarchy is just something in the database. It's really just a behavior of saying how does this item relate to the title. So I'll show you how you edit it, and that will also help illuminate what the different values are. But you can create it while you're adding a new item to an existing title. You can edit it for a single item in the edit behavior screen, or you can edit it for all the serial hierarchies at the same time. So I'll show you if you're in an individual item here and you just click on the bib ID, that will actually take you to just the title itself. So at this point, we're not in an item, we're really just at the title level, which is why you see no photographs or any images or PDFs or anything attached here. And you click Add New Volume at the top. This is the new Add New Volume form. So you can see here we have the display text and display order for each level. So if you're entering values for like a date, for example, your year would be your let me pull this out. Actually, let me show you too. So in this case, there's really not much hierarchy between them. You just have the title and this. But if we were to pull up something like the Gainesville Sun, which is our local newspaper here, and we can start drilling down. These are the levels of the hierarchy. There's the year, the month, and the day. So this is level 1, 2, and 3. So when we're looking at labels and orders, the label for the first one is 1906, and that's the order. January would be the label, and the order would likely be 1. That's because, of course, months aren't alphabetical, so we have to have both the label and the thing. But of course, it doesn't have to be a month. It could be spring, summer, it could be whatever. So that's sort of the different levels of the hierarchy that we're looking at. So when you add a new volume to an existing title, you can obviously provide the serial hierarchy at that moment. So this is maybe not as useful for things like where each individual item is very different, but especially for newspapers where you really just want to bring in all that great bibliographic data from the title, like the Gainesville Sun or Tampa Tribune information, into each individual issue. So this allows you to say import the metadata from this existing volume, and then you can override the title, publication date, serial hierarchy. You can customize this to be whatever values you want in this form, of course. So that's one way you can manipulate the serial hierarchy, just directly when you're adding the item into the interface. The other one is if you have an item that's already in the interface, like this Alachua County Today, if you click Edit Behaviors, you can see and edit the hierarchy. So this is a great case of level 1, again, is the years usually, if you're doing it by publication date. Level 2 is March, and the order is 3, and then the numbers. If you enter it in this form and you give it the publication date, it will actually automatically create your serial hierarchy if it's a newspaper anyway. But you can directly manipulate it here if you like. So that's still at the individual level. So then you can also edit it for all the items at once, and that's what we're looking at here. So you have all these different items that are part of the same title. You can check marks allow you to do some manipulation on them, And this is level 1 with the text and the index, level 2, and level 3. So here you can see a nice little chunk of them, and you can go through and modify every single one at once to make sure they all line up correctly. So really what we've gone through, I think, in just about an hour is the complete hierarchy within the system, from the files, the page images that you have, up to the pages themselves, which are then linked in divisions. Divisions sit underneath items, which is where your METS file sits at the item level. And then items are connected through serial hierarchy to the title. I should really say title, not volumes. And then all of these things, the items and the volumes are tagged to the aggregations as well. So this is really the complete hierarchy from the physical media of the one image you have of one page of one object all the way up through the entire hierarchy in the system.